Hello YouTube and welcome to my channel, Steamy Jimmy, and today I've got a list to share with you. The Bomberman series is one that has been around for a long time, dating back as far as the early 80s. There have been numerous games released across the decades, and with that comes the creation of many bosses. I never realized until recently just how weird some of these characters are, so much so that it has led to the idea for this list. Today, we're going to discuss some of the stranger ones, the bosses that, when looked at more carefully, seem like a product of a wild imagination. And without further ado, here's my list for the top 10 weirdest Bomberman bosses. Number 10, Grumpus, Bomberman 93 for the TurboGrafx-16. Starting our list, we have a Yeti riding a UFO. He's the boss of the Icicle Planet, so it's not too far-fetched to imagine fighting a mythical hairy beast. But what is bizarre is the fact he's riding on a flying saucer. I wonder why the developers chose that. It works well for the boss fight, as he tries to crash into you with it, and he'll even drop tiny snowmen onto the terrain as well. Another thing worth noting is that when defeated, each boss in this game has a comedic scene with Bomberman. In the US version, we see Bomberman cuddling up with Grumpus to stay warm, but in Japan, they are seen sharing one of those Japanese heated tables. That seems like a pointless change, really. Number 9, General Gonzu, Super Bomberman 2 for the Super Nintendo. This creature appears at the very end of the game. When confronting Plasma Bomber in the final stage, you battle him and his machine Skelegard. Seems quite fitting for a final boss fight. Upon his defeat, Plasma walks up to Bomberman and extends his hand, offering a truce. We see Skelegard's mouth open and an arrow of light is fired, destroying Plasma. The machine then explodes to reveal General Gonzu. There are so many questions that accompany his appearance. Why was he inside of the machine Skelegard? How was he able to free himself all of a sudden? What are his true motives and why is he called a general? These questions are never answered, leaving this boss fight to feel like one big mystery. After his defeat, nothing is explained and we never see him again. Just what was the meaning of this monster's appearance? We may never know. Number 8, Oven Range, Bomberman Max 2 for the Game Boy Advance and Bomberman for the PSP. The story of Bomberman Max 2 is pretty lame. Mujo and the Higgy Higgy Bandits use a machine to shrink Bomberman and Max to a minuscule size and then leave them to fight off the hordes of miniature enemies around them. They end up encountering everything from flowers and worms to ladles and tools. It's bizarre enough alone in its own right. But when you reach Area 3, the dining stage, it starts becoming a lot more comical. The duo must face off against a living microwave. In a game this silly, you expect these things to be predictable, but a microwave? I just can't wrap my head around that. It moves around the room, releasing pieces of popcorn into the air, and even throwing out dangerous bombs on occasion. The tail made of cookies on its head will even try to stab you at certain points, so this boss is no pushover. The fun only continues as this boss later appears on Bomberman for PSP, but this time it's in 3D. It's much more jarring to look at this time around. It mostly uses its tail, but will also fire lasers from its body in all directions, so at least they changed it up a bit. Still, it's a household appliance that's attempting to kill you, so make what you will of that. Number 7, Dark Peace, Bomberman Land Series. This character is one worthy of a double take. He looks as though he was assembled from Legos, with different colored and textured sections to his body. I can't help but get visions of Frankenstein's monster when I see him. He appears frequently throughout the Bomberman series. In some of the earlier games, you actually challenge him to battle, dodging his wild charge attack and then bombing him when stunned, while in the later games he's mostly there for dialogue purposes, only issuing minigame challenges with a higher than normal score to beat. The holes cut into his head make for some uncomfortable expressions, kinda like a pumpkin carving on Halloween. There's just something unsettling about the look on his face, even when he's happy. Number 6, Bassery, Bomberman World for the PlayStation 1. Throughout many of the Bomberman games, you often fight a group of evil characters. In many of the same games, the villains will battle you one-on-one or be beamed into the body of a mech for them to control, sometimes even both. And that just happens to be the case here with Cyclone Bomber. She'll make a smug comment before entering this foreign machine behind her. Bassery can eject saw blades from its body, fire off shuriken in multiple directions, and even remove its head, which will bounce around and try to smash you. What the heck? The purple hair on its head reminds me of some kind of plant like a turnip. I can't help but stare at its googly eyes as they roll around constantly, as if this machine is just as confused as I am. What kind of demented person would build something like this? Oh yeah, Bagheera. Number 5, The Sun, Bomberman for the arcade and Bomberman World for the arcade. IRAM was allowed to make 2 arcade games for the Bomberman series, and they really took advantage of that. What resulted is solid gameplay, a unique twist to the story, and some of the most outlandish enemies and bosses ever conceptualized. Here we have the unnamed Sun boss from the first arcade game. It flies around the room, licking its mouth constantly. If you look close enough, you can even see spit being flung from its lips. That's disgusting. All he really does is try to use touch damage on you, but when he's damaged, he splits into smaller and smaller pieces which move faster. This can get pretty tricky, so you'll need to keep your eyes peeled. The smaller suns continue to make the same expressions. I mean, just look at these. Even after being blown into tiny bits, it can't help but still make that perverted expression. How do they come up with this stuff? Something similar can be said of the sun from the second arcade game. The two have no relation, but given how strange they are, I couldn't help but lump them together on this list. This time it's wearing sunglasses and is surrounded by little versions of itself. The glasses will shine and then each of the smaller suns will be ejected across the screen. You have to time your bombing accordingly in order to damage it. I don't know what it is with the Bomberman series and bosses that have realistic expressions. It seems like they spent more time making them look as creepy as possible instead of coming up with varied attacks. Every time I look at this thing, I can't help but think of the sun from the Raisin Bran box. The best part is when you defeat it. You get to watch its sunglasses get blown off his face while it screams in pain. Talk about crazy. Number 4, 16 Ton from Bomberman World Arcade. Another entry from the IRAM arcade games, we have 16 Ton. I call him that due to a lack of an official name. This monstrosity bounds about the room, extending its 16-ton appendages out in an attempt to kill you. I decided to do a little research and, assuming the T stands for ton on those weights, each one weighs 32,000 pounds. This thing is leaping into the air with over 128,000 pounds equipped to its body and can fling it around like it's nothing. The strain sounds unimaginable. That would explain why it constantly has bloodshot eyes. We also get more realistic expressions here, as this thing has a horrific damage face. Just look at the intensity in that face. When it dies, the same look becomes shrouded in flames. Now that's an image I wish I could forget. Number 3, Clown Mask, Super Bomberman for the Super Nintendo. Here's one that gamers seem most familiar with, a massive balding clown face. All he really does is float around the room after you, and when damaged, emits electric sparks in many directions. The face will stay delayed for a few seconds before showing any kind of pain. It's very unsettling to see just how much agony this thing is in, and if you look closely enough, you can even see trails of tears that blend into its makeup. Disturbing indeed. It has a lot of HP, but when you finally defeat it, it makes one final expression as it explodes in a fiery blaze, and then drops into the floor, never to be seen again. Before this being could even be understood, it was destroyed. Truly a mystery. Number 2, Pogo, Neo Bomberman for the arcade. On top of the IRAM games, Bomberman had one more venture into the arcades with Neo. Seems like Bomberman exists on nearly every system these days. Area 3 holds this boss, a big-headed kid on a pogo stick. Once again, this character has no official name, so it's often referred to as Pogo. Not sure why the arcade games were treated this way. It bounces around, trying to land on you, while it spits out music notes that will bar your movement unless destroyed. Whoever came up with this boss was really reaching for something unusual. It's wearing blue and red 3D glasses, which show how out of date it is, headphones, a hat, and piercings. Yes, the developers even took the time to think this character needed to have its lip pierced. Why? Is this based on some punk teenager they knew at the time? I regret to say this, but while taking the time to record some footage, I noticed there is a strong possibility that this character is naked as well. Direct, if you dare, your attention to the inner thigh. It doesn't seem like there's any pants here, or even a shirt, although it could be obscured by the pogo stick itself. It is wearing boots and wrist bracelets, but that's about it. Could they really have created a naked teenage monster as a boss? I don't think that's an answer anyone is looking for. Well, we've covered quite a few bizarre bosses, but before we get to number 1, here's a few honorable mentions. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for number 1. Number 1, Frog, Bomberman Bakufu Sentai Bomberman for the PSP. Don't be shocked if you've never heard of this one. In 2006, someone decided a crossover between Bomberman and the world of Power Rangers needed to happen. As crazy as it sounds, it actually works okay for a video game. The arranged stages allow you to play as Ranger characters, but in a modernized Bomberman style, while the classic stages allow you to return to more old-fashioned rules. Overall, it's an alright game. When you reach the boss of Yellow Bomber's world, you are greeted to this thing. That's right, someone in this plane of existence decided we needed a frog with a pacifier to be deadly. They even picked out a specific body type for the frog! You can see its tail, showing that it clearly is not even in its final form. What significance does that have? Just make it a frog! It's also quite large. I can say if I ever saw it leaping anywhere near me, I'd be terrified. All it does is hop around, and will sometimes leap off screen, dropping bouncy bombs to try and hurt you. Otherwise, it's a relatively easy boss. Still though, the frog alone would have sufficed, but a pacifier though? And it's a pink one to boot! They wanted you to see this thing! Well, that's about all I have for you. We've seen animated suns and clowns, naked teenagers on pogo sticks, and frogs using baby toys. It's been a good list. I'd like to thank Plasma Captain and the Bomberman community for helping me compile these choices. Hopefully the next list won't have to contain as much nightmare fuel. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay steamy my friends, and we'll be back soon.